Ryan Callaway sat motionless in the defendant's chair, the heavy orange jumpsuit pressing against his skin like a reminder of the unjust reality he found himself in. His hands were shackled in front of him, the cold metal biting into his wrists as if to ensure he never forgot that he was a man condemned. Every breath he took felt heavier than the last, as if the air around him had thickened, weighed down by the weight of the moment. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him, silent accusations, piercing gazes from every corner. To some he was just another criminal, but to those who had worked with him, he had been a respected detective. Now sitting in the defendant's chair, the very place he had often watched from as a witness, Ryan knew that no one in this room truly cared for the truth. Not anymore. The gavel struck, loud and final. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ryan Callaway, guilty of first-degree murder. The words cut through him like a blade, each syllable leaving a mark that no amount of time could erase. His jaw tightened, his mind racing, but his body refused to react. He had prepared for this moment. He had known that it would come, and yet the sting of the verdict still sent a tremor through his chest. His life was over, and for what? A crime he didn't commit, a case so intricately woven with lies, so carefully orchestrated that even the best detective in the room could see nothing but his own downfall. Ryan had been framed. He was certain of it. The evidence against him had been fabricated. The ballistics test showed that the bullet that killed Darius Kemp had come from his service weapon. But Ryan knew that wasn't possible. He had never pulled the trigger. He had been set up, and yet here he was, guilty in the eyes of the law. He had tried everything to prove his innocence. He had begged, screamed, and demanded that anyone listen to him. But the people who were supposed to protect him had turned their backs. They had betrayed him. His colleagues, his friends, all had given in to the narrative the prosecution had spun. Even Detective Jason Carter, his closest ally, had been forced to keep quiet. Jason had been warned, stay silent or risk being swept up in the same storm. And so Ryan had sat alone in a jail cell, screaming at the walls that held him captive, hoping for a miracle that never came. Ryan's eyes wandered across the room, searching, looking for something, someone. In the back, his daughter Lily sat in silence. She was the only person who mattered, the only person left in his world, 7 years old, the bright spark in his otherwise shattered existence. She had already lost her mother 3 years ago in a hit-and-run accident, and now it seemed she was about to lose her father too. The pain of that thought was almost unbearable. Lily had been his rock, the one thing that kept him going even in his darkest moments. He had promised her that he would always protect her, no matter the cost. But now as he sat here, shackled and convicted, he felt like the worst kind of failure. He had let her down. She deserved more than a father who was about to be locked away for life. The judge's voice rang out again, but Ryan barely heard it. The world around him had faded to a blur, the weight of the verdict pressing in on him like a vice. But even in his numbness, his eyes sought Lily once more. Her little hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her fingers wrapped around the stuffed rabbit he had bought her when she was 5. Her face was streaked with tears, her lip trembling, but she fought to stay strong. She was trying so hard, but Ryan could see the fear in her eyes. She had been through so much already, losing her mother, and now she was about to lose her father too. The thought of her growing up alone, without the love and guidance she needed, tore at Ryan's soul. As if sensing his gaze, Lily looked up, her eyes meeting his. It was only for a moment, but in that fleeting instant, Ryan saw the pain and the heartbreak in her eyes. She was just a child, and yet here she was, forced to face a world that had already taken so much from her. The judge's voice broke through Ryan's thoughts again. Does the defendant have any final requests before transfer? Ryan took a deep breath, his chest tightening as he stood. His mind raced, but his heart knew exactly what he needed. There was only one thing that mattered in this world. One thing that he would never give up on. Please, he said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. Please, just let me hug my daughter one last time. The courtroom was silent for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Even the judge, a man known for his cold, unfeeling demeanor, seemed to hesitate. After what felt like an eternity, the judge gave a reluctant nod. 3 minutes. The bailiffs moved toward Lily, guiding her toward her father. Ryan's hands shook as they unlocked the cuffs, but for the briefest of moments, he was free. Free to hold his daughter, free to give her the love and comfort she so desperately needed. He dropped to his knees as she reached him, her arms flying around him, clinging to him like a lifeline. Ryan held her tightly, his heart breaking as he pressed his face into her hair. He had never imagined that this would be how they would say goodbye. He had always thought that he would be there for her, to guide her through life, to protect her. But now all he could offer her was this fleeting moment. "I love you so much, baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay. I'll always be with you." But Lily didn't respond the way he had hoped. She shook her head fiercely, her small body trembling in his arms. And then, in a voice so quiet, so full of fear, she whispered words that shattered Ryan's world. "Daddy, if you don't stop, he'll hurt me too." Ryan's entire body went rigid. His heart stopped. He felt the world around him collapse in an instant. Who was she talking about? Who could possibly hurt his little girl? His mind scrambled for answers, but nothing made sense. His gaze swept over her arms, her neck, her small, trembling form. That's when he saw it, the faint bruise just beneath the sleeve of her dress. Ryan's stomach dropped, a wave of nausea sweeping over him. His daughter was in danger. She was in grave danger, and he had no idea who was behind it. "Who, Lily?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who's going to hurt you?" But before Lily could answer, the bailiffs yanked him away. Time was up. "No! Please, I need more time!" Ryan's voice broke as he struggled against the guards. But they were relentless. They dragged him toward the exit, his eyes never leaving his daughter's tear-streaked face. "Stay with Uncle Jason, baby!" Ryan shouted as they pulled him away. "Stay with him! You hear me? Stay with him!" Lily nodded frantically, her tear-filled eyes haunting him as the door slammed shut between them. Ryan's body was shoved forward, his legs unsteady as he was pulled down the corridor. His heart pounded in his chest, and all he could think of was his daughter. Lily, was she safe? Was she really okay? But there was no time to dwell on it, not now. Ryan's mind was consumed by a singular thought. His daughter was in danger, and no one was listening. Back in his cell, Ryan paced. The small room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing in, suffocating him. The cold metal of the bars did little to ease the growing sense of panic. Lily was out there, alone, terrified, and there was nothing he could do to protect her. He had tried. He had pleaded with everyone, officers, child welfare agents, anyone who would listen. But each time he was met with the same cold, indifferent response. His requests for help were brushed aside, ignored, or dismissed. He was just a convicted murderer in their eyes, a man whose only crime was speaking out against a system that had betrayed him. But this wasn't about him. This wasn't about his conviction or his fight for justice. This was about his daughter, his precious little girl, who was now in danger, and no one seemed to care. "You lost your right to be concerned about that little girl the second you put a bullet in Darius Kemp's head," they had told him. Ryan's fists clenched, his teeth grinding together. He was trapped. No one would listen to him. No one would help him. His daughter was out there, and there was nothing he could do, except one thing. He had to reach Jason Carter, his closest friend, the only person who still believed in him. Jason had been there, side by side with him throughout the years, but even Jason had been forced to keep silent. Ryan had seen the warning signs. Jason had been warned, stay silent or risk being dragged down with him. But Jason wasn't one to back down. Ryan knew that, and Jason would come for him. Ryan trusted him with his life. Ryan's mind raced. There had to be a way to get a message to Jason. He couldn't wait any longer. His daughter's life was at stake. Meanwhile, Jason sat in his apartment, the dim glow of his desk lamp illuminating the clutter of old case files scattered across the table. His fingers trembled as he sifted through the papers, trying to make sense of it all. Ryan had been framed, and Jason knew it, but the evidence was damning. Every lead they had uncovered seemed to point back to Ryan. Jason's phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. He glanced at the screen, expecting to see another update on the case. But instead, the name that flashed on the screen sent a chill through his spine. Vanessa Green. She had been an informant, someone who had mysteriously disappeared shortly after Kemp's death. Jason knew she had the answers they needed. If anyone could help crack the case wide open, it was her. Jason grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, his mind already racing. He had no idea what Vanessa might know, but he had to find out. Ryan Callaway felt like a cornered animal. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to fight, to break free. But the cold reality of his circumstances was undeniable. He was locked away in a cell, far from his daughter, far from the world that had once made sense. He had been branded guilty of a crime he did not commit, framed by those he trusted most. And now his daughter, the only piece of his life left to save, was in danger. The walls of his cell closed in around him as he lay on the cot, eyes wide open, mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. His body was exhausted, but his mind raced through every possibility. How could he help her? How could he protect Lily when every single door seemed closed to him? He couldn't rest, not while Lily was out there, vulnerable. And the truth was buried so deep it felt almost impossible to uncover. Meanwhile, Jason Carter was just as consumed by the mission, though he had more freedom of movement. Jason had always been the kind of man who would never leave a fellow cop behind. And the bond he had shared with Ryan was something deeper than just friendship. It was a brotherhood forged in the fires of shared experiences. Jason wasn't going to let Ryan down now. As he sat in his apartment, going through the case files once again, his thoughts were interrupted by a text message from an old contact in the police department. It was cryptic, but Jason had learned to trust his instincts. "I have a lead. Meet me at the warehouse off Fifth Avenue." Without hesitation, Jason grabbed his jacket and keys, leaving the apartment in a rush. Time was of the essence. Vanessa Green, the key informant, was the only one who could help them put the pieces together. Jason knew that her testimony could change everything. The drive to the warehouse was tense. The streets passed by in a blur of neon lights and darkness. Jason's heart was heavy, his mind focused entirely on the mission ahead. He had to find out who was behind the conspiracy. He had to find out why Ryan had been framed and why Lily was being targeted. Jason arrived at the rundown warehouse on Fifth Avenue. The place was deserted, the building's dark windows giving it an air of secrecy. As he entered, the smell of mildew and dust greeted him. There, standing in the middle of the room, was Vanessa Green. She was shaking, her clothes disheveled, and her eyes were wide with fear. Jason could see the toll the last few days had taken on her. She was a woman who had been forced to live in the shadows, running from the very people who were supposed to protect her. Vanessa looked up at him as he stepped closer, her face pale. She had always been a strong woman, but now she seemed fragile, as though the weight of everything she knew was finally breaking her down. "I've got something," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. She handed Jason a folder. "I wasn't supposed to find this, but I did. The truth about Ryan's case and the people behind it." Jason took the folder, his pulse quickening as he flipped it open. The first page revealed a series of documents, coded messages, accounts of transactions, and names. The names of officers within the department, high-ranking officials involved in something far bigger than Ryan's case. Vanessa continued, "Ryan wasn't the only one set up. There's a network, and it goes all the way to the top. Darius Kemp wasn't just some informant. He was working for someone else, someone powerful." Jason's mind raced as he pieced together the puzzle. This was bigger than just a corrupt cop framing another. This was a well-orchestrated plan to take down people who were getting too close to the truth. "We need to find out who's really behind this," Jason said. "Ryan didn't pull that trigger, but whoever did is still out there, controlling everything." Vanessa nodded, her expression grim. "They'll kill us all if we keep digging. You have to understand, they don't want the truth to come out. Not now, not ever." Just then, the sound of tires screeching broke the silence. Jason's heart skipped a beat. They were not alone. Vanessa's eyes widened in terror. "We need to go, now!" Jason grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back exit. As they made their way to the door, gunshots rang out, shattering the quiet. The sounds of chaos erupted, and Jason knew that time was running out. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted with Vanessa, her hand clutching his in a vice grip. They burst into the alley just as the sound of footsteps and more gunfire echoed from behind them. Whoever was after them wasn't playing games. Vanessa stumbled, but Jason caught her, pulling her toward the street. A car skidded to a stop, and before Jason could react, the door swung open. It was Ryan's old contact from the department, Detective Michael Hayes. "Get in!" Michael shouted. Without thinking, they both dove into the car, slamming the door shut just as a hail of bullets hit the side of the vehicle. Jason turned to Vanessa, his eyes filled with urgency. "We're getting you out of here." Back in Brighton Maximum Security Prison, Ryan had no idea what was happening outside. His world had become a maze of confusion and rage. He had tried everything to reach someone, anyone who would listen about Lily's safety. His frantic calls for help had been ignored. His thoughts were on his daughter. He had been so close. One moment with her was all he had needed, but it had been ripped away. The realization hit him hard. He was running out of time. In his cell, Ryan's desperation grew as he realized the guards weren't the only threat. There was something far more sinister at play. The system that had failed him was now coming after his daughter. And the longer he stayed in here, the more his chances of rescuing her dwindled. Jason and Vanessa made their way to a safe house. Inside, they set up a plan to go after the real masterminds behind the conspiracy. Jason was determined to bring the whole system crashing down, but Ryan's safety, and Lily's, was the priority. Jason made a call to a trusted source in the department. "It's time to pull the strings. We're going after Langley." Ryan's thoughts raced as Jason explained their plan to infiltrate Langley's estate. There were multiple high-ranking officers, mercenaries, and security measures to get past, but Jason was confident they could succeed. Ryan had one goal in mind: to get his daughter back. He knew this mission wouldn't be easy, but it was the only chance he had. His mind flashed to the day he'd been convicted, and to Lily's terrified face. "Let's do this," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the chaos that surrounded him. The estate was a fortress. The high walls and elaborate security systems were meant to keep intruders out, but not Ryan Callaway. As he snuck past the guards, the adrenaline surged in his veins. He was getting closer. Jason covered him from a distance, providing support while keeping an eye on the cameras and security feeds. They had a plan, but even the best plans could go awry. Ryan's heart pounded as he moved deeper into the estate. When he found Lily, her small form clinging to the corner of the room, his heart broke. She was terrified, but she had the courage to whisper, "Daddy, I knew you'd come." Ryan's pulse quickened, but there was no time for tears. They had to move. The guards were closing in. As the alarm blared, Ryan sprinted with Lily in his arms, dodging gunfire and making his way toward the exit. Jason provided the diversion they needed, and they made it to the car, the sound of pursuing guards fading into the night. Ryan held Lily tight, relief flooding his body as they drove away from the chaos. He had his daughter back. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel hope again. But the battle wasn't over. They had uncovered the truth, but the real fight was just beginning. The corrupt forces that had conspired to frame Ryan and take his daughter were still out there. Langley and Wallace may have been taken down, but others like them were waiting in the shadows. Ryan stared out the window, determined. His world had been turned upside down, but he wasn't going to stop fighting. Not for Lily, not for justice. Ryan and Lily were safe, for now. The truth had come to light, and the city of Brighton would never be the same. With Langley and Wallace in custody, the corruption inside the police department had been exposed, but there were always more battles to fight. Ryan knew that he would never stop protecting his daughter. As he watched her laugh and play, he realized that this fight wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had been wronged, everyone who had been silenced. And so he made a vow. He would never stop fighting, not for himself and not for anyone else.